So the past couple of weeks, I would say, have been pretty insane for zombies news. Everything regarding like potentially Chronicles 2 for Cold War, or even just getting light shed upon what was meant for Black Ops 4, and the idea that a lot of these remastered maps or otherwise just more zombies content exists somewhere. There's been a lot coming out recently, and especially in regards to the last couple days, where somebody who had a friend that worked at Treyarch gave him a lot of information about, what is the fate of these remasters and what I guess potentially would be Chronicles 2. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about what he has to say. We're going to be discussing a bit about everything from the cancellation of the rest of the Chaos storyline, even an Origins Reimagined that was planned or even worked on at one point and maybe is potentially still out there somewhere, we don't know. But either way, not only are we going to talk about the fate of this cut content and where these maps may have gone, we're also going to be talking about the future of zombies and why the Activision Microsoft deal might not actually be going through and what that might all mean. We have a lot to unpack today. It's going to be pretty loaded now, where a lot of this information is coming from the guy who put this all on Twitter. I won't be mentioning his name out of respect for him because from what I understand, he doesn't really like attention, so I'm just going to say that he had a friend that worked at Treyarch apparently that gave him or basically told him a lot of this information, and I tend to believe him not only because the information makes sense and lines up, but it also coincides greatly with things that I know about behind the scenes of zombies as well, and for what that's worth, a lot of this, if not all of it, is verifiable. So yeah, sit down and get ready for some pretty crazy stuff. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, that's all I ask in return, and definitely make sure you're subscribed if you're new to the channel for more zombies content and plenty more. So anyways, like I said, I have blurred out his name and everything for his privacy, but he says, I want to clarify some things. The original plan for BO4's release to have all Chaos maps in the first year of content, and then second year was going to be Ether exclusive. Obviously, this would have been a very bad idea from the get-go. He says Treyarch obviously saw that coming, that's no real big surprise, and that the Chaos story wasn't supposed to be the definitive end of that, and it was supposed to continue in the next game until, obviously, things did not go well. However, the Ether storyline was completely supposed to end at this point in the game, or after this second year of content, which is interesting because it's like the actual Ether story would have ended post DLC 4 and during the season basically of Modern Warfare, which is very strange, and obviously that wasn't the situation. We have the Dark Ether story now being introduced in Cold War, and it doesn't look like that was planned from the very beginning, or at least up until the ending of BO4, which again is kind of already stuff we knew, but it's important context for what we're about to talk about. Now in this post he details some of the things we would have encountered in the Chaos story, which ended up being an Atlantis map that was allegedly cut. This was something zombie players wanted forever, even before the introduction of the Chaos story, and while I can't say I was the biggest fan of the Chaos story in general, I will admit that there were a lot of settings and ideas and places they could have gone that would have been extraordinarily interesting that I'm not sure if they could have done realistically with Ether. But that aside, let's talk about the Ether storyline and what I'm sure a lot of people are primarily concerned about. He says, as for the Ether story, the first would have been a reimagined Origins during the Battle of the Great War in 1299. Primus would wield the original staves. Likely an alternate ending could be unlocked with Pablo passing a message to Richthofen, allowing the events of Blood of the Dead to occur. The grand finale of the Ether story would have taken place in the Dark Ether following Victus immediately after Togder Toten. It would have been similar to Origins, with Samantha leading Victus through the Hellscape, gathering help from allies throughout the Ether story. These allies would have included Dr. Gersh, Maxis, Pablo, Peter McCain, the Mob of the Dead crew, possibly even more. It would have contained enemies from previous maps, but mostly Monty and Keepers would have been the primary threat. It would have likely ended with Samantha joining our allies and Samantha in the new world. Now, Zombies Chronicles 2, here's where it gets really interesting because obviously it was real at one point. And this is why I believe this to be credible. It coincides with all the information we currently have, but basically Chronicles 2 would have seen us getting a Die Rise remaster, a Buried remaster, a Faithful 5, Call of the Dead, and Mob of the Dead remaster alongside a Transit reimagining / expansion of it. And this makes a ton of sense, especially if you watched my recent videos where we talk about how Die Rise and Buried are allegedly leaked for Cold War coming out in potentially a year 2. Now, I'm not making any implications or any remarks about the other maps. A Faithful 5, Call of the Dead, or Mob of the Dead remaster being added to Cold War does seem like a little bit of a stretch, but at least to some extent, these maps are either fully developed or partially developed and maybe could be picked up later on. I don't know. But also the transit situation is super interesting to me me, because obviously it's pretty clear that we were never going to get just a copy paste of BO2's Transit into a modern day zombie system. It just simply wouldn't work. So if they were already, they had the foresight to know that and thought to rework it or expand and reimagine for either BO4 or maybe an upcoming game, that makes significantly more sense, and it again does line up with what we know. Also points out the fact that they got some celebrities to come back in BO4. Danny Trejo, for example, which I always thought was interesting how they utilized him in Blackout but literally never in Zombies. But apparently that was obviously not the plan. He was going to be utilized in Zombies to some extent. They want to get Danny Trejo for basically nothing, or I guess for one mode. They're going to extract as much value out of getting that person as they can. Now he continues on to say and give more details of what these maps would have looked like in practical terms. He talks about a little bit about the library/Atlantis map for the Chaos story being maybe somewhat of a moon situation where you transport to this library and then go to Atlantis, or vice versa. Now he talks about Origins Reimagined, and we don't really know what this map would have been called exactly, but he says, my understanding is the only recognizable part of the map would have been the mound and the chambers. The terrain above would have been very different. Now he goes on to clarify and point out something that many of you guys, including myself, have seen and noticed in the games, is that there's a lot of assets obviously in both multiplayer and Blackout that do seem to indicate that a lot of these maps existed, or they were playing around with elements of these, and they never made it to the game, of course, but you can tell that there are inklings of it still in the game. Now this is very interesting. He says that the original versions of the Chronicles 2 Call of the Dead, Mob, and even 5 were very different to their counterparts. Like obviously Blood of the Dead, Togder Toten, and Classified all exist, so it's like, how do you remaster those maps in presumably for BO4 but make them substantially different than their counterparts, especially Classified, because there's really hardly, there's one extra room, but that's about it. It's basically the same map, so how would you make those substantively different than the previous ones? With Togder Toten and Blood of the Dead, it's not too hard because those maps play vastly different to their original counterparts, but 5 and Classified would be interesting to me. It's not obvious if there was ever a faithful Nuketown remake. Like obviously we have Alpha Omega, and that could have easily somehow been turned into what would have been more original Nuketown from Black Ops 2, but I don't think there's really anything concrete to suggest that ever existed, at least in the terms of Chronicles 2 for BO4. I think the biggest casualty here out of all of this is easily this Origins Reimagined map. This was always the grand ending that to some extent we expected for the end of the Ether story, and I've been saying it for years that literally an Origins reimagining of some sort could probably be one of the greatest maps of all time if done correctly. We don't know very many details at all about the map other than the general outline, but it sounds extraordinarily fun, and it also reminds me of when we found out what the original Revelations Easter egg was supposed to be. I made a whole video about this, but essentially the original Rev Easter egg was supposed to be very different, even, utilizing elements from Moon and putting the summoning key on a rocket, stuff like that. This was ultimately cut from the game or changed, but we don't know how much of this stuff would have made it to the final cut anyways. But regardless, an Origins reimagining with a totally different, overhang besides the battlefields of World War I, and presumably more in lines of the Great War, is an actual casualty to this. And as far as the faithful remasters go, while he doesn't specify for sure because he doesn't know, he does imagine that it would have handled the more traditional perk system rather than how BO4 functioned, which I think would have been the best way to set it apart from how, let's say, Classified feels, or maybe even Blood of the Dead. The original remasters that would be Chronicles 2 would function on their original perk systems, which would have made them feel significantly more like they did in the past. Now, I didn't make this video just to reiterate on stuff. There was a lot of information in this post that I was not previously aware of, but I wanted to make sure everybody's on the same page with this stuff. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because the future of zombies right now is really at a fork in the road, more so than it's been even in the past month, and let me explain why. Basically, we know that obviously these maps exist somewhere to some extent, and the zombies community right now isn't doing too hot. In terms of the newer content in the game that's currently out, Vanguard is bar none not cutting it for anybody, and its player counts are absolutely abysmal. The zombies community really needs to be bailed out soon somehow, and whether that's in the form of Chronicles 2 and Cold War, a lot of people are expecting year 2 content for this game, and we have gotten some to some extent, but I think there's still more on the way. Now, the big thing is are they going to pull the trigger and release some of this stuff for Cold War, or are they going to save this for a future project? Either way, they could save this for 2024. Here's the problem, though. Over the past couple of days, a lot of senators have been urging the FTC to carefully review the Microsoft and Activision Activision merger. The reason being, there's basically clauses legally that prevent major corporations from absorbing one another into giant conglomerates that can't be stopped. So basically, the whole Microsoft absorbing Activision deal and how, in theory, this could be really good news for zombies may not be taking place at all, because the deal at the time of me recording this video hasn't gone through yet and still needs to apparently be reviewed by the FTC. So there is a possibility that this merger could be denied or canceled, and I have no idea what implications that would have on zombies, because clearly we're not getting anything major, at least from Treyarch, that is, until 2024 regardless. And if they don't have the assistance from this Microsoft deal, then who knows where zombies hangs at the end of the day. And if they don't release anything for let's say substantial year 2 content for Cold War, I have no idea what they're going to do for the next like couple of years. It's really hard to say, but a lot hangs in the balance right now. But given the information we just went over with these remastered maps that were made, at least for BO4, and the fact that they exist, this makes a lot of sense in terms of what Treyarch is probably sitting on and trying to find the right time to release this stuff and in the correct way possible with the right timing. It's all really complicated stuff, but I wanted to go over this with you guys. Let me know what you think down below in the comment section. If you guys enjoyed the video, nonetheless, drop a like if you did, subscribe if you're brand new before you go, and I also stream on Twitch. Link to that is in the description. Go follow me over there, you nerd. I will see you guys there, but anyways, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.